Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being part of this Narrating Urban Lives conversation called Urban Undersides. My name is Wangui Kimari, and I'm one of the co-organizers of this series. I don't have anything clever to say. The clever things will be said by Rodrigo and by Irene and by Alanna and likely by Michele. But my job is just to welcome you, to also draw your attention to the Narrating Urban Life series, which has a series of 5 events that have been happening since the beginning of this year. And this has been shared in the chat, I think, by Meta. And just to, I know Kenny is going to go shortly, and then we'll give room for Michele to ask the first question. Really, as just some brief context, we were thinking about, for this Urban Undersides event, thinking about what we need to unlearn when we are doing research, what worlds we put aside, and kind of riffing off Malcolm Ferdinand's term offworlds. What offworlds do we put aside? And also, what do we need to do genuinely in centering these offworlds? What can we do as scholars, as researchers that can enhance liberatory praxis? So hopefully we're going to talk about that today. In full disclosure, when we put Urban Undersides, I think it was partially because it was a little bit catchy, but also because it's capacious. So I just wanted to be honest about our motivations for using that term. But I'm very happy it's capacious because I look forward to seeing what Irene, Alanna, how Irene, Alanna, and Rodrigo will take this forward. So I'll stop now and give way to Kenny, who will say a few words, and then Kenny can introduce, leave the floor for Michele. Thank you.
Sure, and I'll keep this very brief, just a little bit of context about the series as a whole. This started with a conversation between Carl, Wangui, Rosemary, and Weisha and myself, the co-organizers of the series. And really it was following up on an earlier conversation about the relationship between urban history and urban theory. So what do those two fields have to say to each other? And being somewhat of a historian myself, and somewhat ventured into urban studies, I felt that disconnect, especially in the field of urban studies. So kind of a mutual learning, I think, is something that we had aimed for with this series of events. And I think there are 5 of them. Some of them have already passed, some still to go. But really, this is meant to be an open conversation, so not so much a presentation of work, but really a more informal exchange that hopefully will interest not only urban theorists and urban historians, but also other scholars interested in the built environment and questions of power and the global, I think, which is the frame, of course, of the Global Urban History Project that has so kindly hosted these events. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. And so my name is Michele Lancione, and with Abdomalik Simone, I co-direct the Beyond Inhabitation lab, and Wangui is part of the steering committee of our lab. And so when she came with this beautiful idea, we were very happy to be part of this conversation. So today we're going to hear from 3 of our friends and comrades and colleagues. The first one is going to be Alanna Osbourne. Alanna is assistant professor in geography at Blackburn University. Then we're going to hear from Irene Peano, who is based at the Institute of Social Science in Lisbon. And then we are going to hear from Rodrigo Castriota, who is one of the ERC postdoctoral fellows working on an ERC project I'm currently running in Turin. So what we're going to do now is that I'm going to ask a question to these beautiful people, and they will provide an answer of sort. We will say something around this positioning question. Then we will open it up for a little bit of a Q&A. I will ask a second question, a little bit of Q&A after the second question as well. And then we're going to hear from Wangui. So I guess the first question that we, Wangui and myself, would like to ask to our colleagues is essentially, the following one. It is, what are the urban undersides in your work, and why do you think they are important? And in a sense, Wangui is asking us to think about urban undersides, as we heard before. First of all, because it's very capacious, as we heard, as a kind of phraseology, but also it points to those kind of things that have been normalized or rendered invisible or unimportant in the urban and beyond. So this is more or less the general framework. And now we would like to hear from Alanna, Irene, and Rodrigo of how they have been dealing in their own research around these kind of urban undersides. So I would ask Alanna maybe to start and to speak for about 8-10 minutes, and then we will move forward to Irene and Rodrigo.
Okay. Well, first, thank you very much for having me, for inviting me to speak this evening, but also, Wangui, no pressure. I'll try to say the smart things that you kind of set me up to say, or set us up to say. So in I want to start by saying that it was an interesting and intriguing invitation, because I had never used the term undersides before. I hadn't thought with that term before. And at first I was a little bit worried. I thought maybe I'd missed a step, a conversation or a body of work. And then you reassured us with regards to that. And I started to think about the term and what it would generate for me, and how it could be useful in thinking about my research. And the first thing that was apparent is that it is related to, but not subsumed by, other words that we deploy as critical geographers, such as the surrounds. I'm thinking here of Abdul Simone, the urban grounds, thinking here of your work, Michele, but with Ashamin, but also the margins, etc. So all these words that we use to think about urban spaces and processes that are often invisibilized or otherwise discarded sometimes from normative canons of producing geographical knowledge. Now, when thinking about the urban undersides or the undersides in relation to my work, two things came to mind. The first is a picture that I had seen the morning of receiving the email, the invitation to speak. And this was a picture of an animal seen from below. I can just show you very quickly what this picture was, because I think a lot of how I've been thinking is inspired by that picture. Let me see if I can share my screen. I can't seem to. Something about, recording my screen or something, I don't know. Anyway, the picture shows a dog pictured from below, so you can see the underbelly and the paws, but you can't see the head, you can't see the back of the animal, you can't see anything but the underbelly, the sort of exposed flesh under all of the fur. And what that prompted for me in relation to thinking about the undersides was really this idea of looking at the urban from its sort of soft and fleshy underbelly, from the parts that is maybe vulnerable, but also essential and vital. And this brought about a series of bodily metaphors that really connected with ways in which I'd been thinking about neighborhoods and communities that I have worked in, but also people and places that I relate to, come from, right? And these neighborhoods and peoples and communities and spaces have been described in these sort of similar corporeal fashion. And I'm thinking here more specifically of Trenchtown, neighborhood of Kingston, Jamaica, that is famous for being the birthplace of reggae, home to reggae superstar Bob Marley, but also infamous for being a high crime, low income urban area. And that is often described in Jamaica as the underside, the underbelly, the heart or the gut of the city, but also of the nation's cultural identity to some extent, as understood as also being the pulse and the heartbeat of the nation. And so there was something about the urban undersides that prompted this sort of corporeal thinking about space and enabled me to kind of think about holding that tension, the tension of both the essential vitality of space, the sort of heartbeat and pulse and livability of space, but also this vulnerability and fleshiness and also sort of easily discarded or endangered or disregarded space. Now, the second way in which the notion of undersides plays in or sort of comes up in my research is in current work that I've been doing, where I've been thinking about the relationship between rocks, museums, and outer space, and more specifically about rocks and extractivism. And here I've been thinking with the work of Catherine Yusuf, who deploys the term geologic realism to unpack how geologic imaginaries consolidate particular subjective or inhuman placings. So really what Catherine Yusuf does is she invites us to think about how we think about what lies underground and how these thought patterns conceptually and materially bind inorganic matter and racialized bodies to the inhuman or to lesser forms of humanity. And so here, this idea of thinking from the undersides for me has also been an invitation, or I've taken it as an invitation to think about rocks and the underground that I've started to research as a space that that is tied to human bodies and tied to how we think and how we view what comes under, what is underneath. So yeah, these are the sort of prompts that I'm putting out there and the two ways in which this has resonated with my work. I really look forward to sort of tying links to Irene and Rodrigo's work, but also maybe just quickly to say that, because in the question that you posed, Michele, you asked why this is important. And I think this is important, this idea of the underside and this picture of the underbelly of the dog or the upturned animal, or even the grounds beneath the grounds, the undergrounds, is that it forces or invites a different perspective, a different outlet, and a shift in how we look and how we think about a space, as not and a sort of perspective and a sort of look that moves beyond the idea of top down, ground, or bottom, but also under, what happens underneath, what happens underneath as related to the rest, or sort of cutting across the rest. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Alanna. Maybe we can move straight to Irene, if that's okay, Irene?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation and to see you all. So I guess, well, the first thing that I would say in relation to the question and the notion of urban undersides is that in my own work, I think the very framing of what I'm looking at and working with as urban is a form of unlearning. It's a form of kind of disrupting mainstream or kind of common sense understandings of the subjects of my research and militancy, i.e. the archipelago of encampments that have sprung up in Italian agribusiness districts. And these are one and the same time recruitment hubs for agribusiness. These are populated by migrant people, and also kind of spaces of autonomous reproduction. This is how I've come militancy research with them. And so normally these are framed as rural spaces, and I think them to kind of to understand them as being part of urban processes of extraction of capital, kind of operations of extraction of, and kind of logistical coordination is already kind of performing an epistemic shift, and therefore it is a process of unlearning of sorts, but also it allows to kind of unearth and dig up, to kind of connect to what Alanna was saying, the multiple temporalities that are at play. This has been something that I've been working on more specifically in the last few years. And so the ways in which kind of forms of spatial containment have sort of stratified across the centuries and kind of resonate in the present, and these are again kind of related to processes of primitive accumulation and extraction that began in tandem with the beginning of capitalist agriculture in the districts that I'm dealing with. And so again, kind of to unearth the multiple temporalities at play in the kind of development of these spaces means also to subvert mainstream narratives that either confine these spaces to an eternal presence of exception, or confine these spaces to an eternal present past of exception. That is to say that narratives of backwardness that relate to its southern Italian agriculture, but also to kind of West African populations who inhabit these spaces, are kind of common understandings, common depictions of what is going on there. Therefore, I mean, these are kind of portrayed as remnants and exceptions, and even kind of related to, by means of the notion of slavery, to kind of, you know, the past of the Atlantic slave trade in ways that I think kind of do more harm than good, because again, they're not kind of subtle readings of the ways in which the past recurs, but they are ways of kind of keeping these phenomena at a distance and kind of decentering them, sort of not understanding them as kind of central components of the ways in which extraction operates, but as again, kind of residual phenomena. And therefore, then to kind of, what is particularly striking of these spaces is the fact that they sprang up on ruins of various kinds, from the early 19th century workers' quarters in the large farms, in the large capitalist farms, but also from later attempts at land reclamation and settler colonization of previously kind of extensively farmed fields, like very large kind of estates. And so I'm looking at the ways in which kind of all these sort of spaces have stratified as kind of attempts to contain labor and control its mobility, but also again, kind of in reference to the reference to the urban, I think is important in also highlighting kind of the inner recalcitrance of people in the spaces they build towards these projects, and the recurring failures that this recalcitrance has allowed and continues to allow in the present, because actually kind of the way in which policies of resettlement and colonization were framed across the contemporary periods were as kind of counters to an urbanization process that was perceived as inherently dangerous. And so kind of the dangerous classes, the sort of degraded environments that they built and lived in were then kind of were dismantled, or were sought to be dismantled by means of projects of more or less forced resettlement, that have then left ruins in their wake, where kind of new projects of containment and resistance to them kind of keep popping up. And I'm not here kind of supposing any kind of straightforward continuity, but rather looking at kind of accretions and recursions, and so ways in which kind of multiple temporalities sort of constantly assemble and reassemble, right? And what this does, I mean, what this temporal depth does to kind of, first of all, better understand these phenomena that are kind of heavily represented in very kind of orientalizing ways, and also perhaps provide tools for kind of supporting the recalcitrance that I was talking about. I don't know if that made any sense, but yes, happy to discuss further. Thank you.
It did. Wangui was right. Okay, thank you, Irene, thank you, Alanna. And last but not least, we go to Rodrigo.
Hello all. How are you doing? First of all, thank you so much for the very kind invitation, Michele and Wangui. And thank you for putting me together with the grown-ups. You know, it really means a lot to me. And Irene and Alanna, is a pleasure to share this panel with you. And of course, I wish we were doing this in person so I could give you all a big squishy hug. Okay, I'm trying to share my screen, and
you should be able to. It might just ask you to like approve permission to record your screen because we're recording the Zoom call. If you see that pop up. So like if you go to the green share screen button.
yeah, it's yeah, let me see if I can do it now. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I also don't have anything clever to say, but I'll try my best here. Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little, briefly about my work before I, try to discuss what the urban undersides, mean in my work. During most of my years, I have engaged with, let's say, not so conventional topics and terrains of urban research along the lines that Irene just presented. My main research interest has been extractivism in this more literal sense, inhabitation, especially the practices and circuits that majorities use to make their living, often in relation to extraction. And third, is the idea of extended urbanization has been very important to me, which refers to the extension of different kinds of urban materialities and practices and rationalities beyond city space itself. And then I did my PhD in mining towns in extractive regions in the Amazon that encapsulate these dimensions. So for the past almost 10 years, I have repeatedly asked myself the question of what the urban is, but I did so by making sure that I wasn't asking that question from a big metropolis as most of urban research does. And for me, what is interesting from this invitation to discuss the underside is that most of these debates are framed in a kind of inside and outside perspective. So what is outside of the city and yet is still urban on its inside? Or what is the scale of the urban in comparison to the city? What's their reach? What are their limits? And appreciate this idea of the undersides, because if we think, with Wangui, that the underside is that has been normalized as invisible, then I would like to draw attention to how much of this urban underside can be found in this outsides of urban research, what I have been working for so long. So what I did was just to take 3 questions that hopefully we can discuss afterwards that relates to these outsides of the city, but yet urban, but yet the underside. First one regards politics. So, most urbanists were trained to believe that the air of the city sets you free. And I think there is nothing further from the truth of that. The idea that the city is a privileged space of encounter and complexity in politics. And that might be true, but if it is true, then if it is the center of political dispute and contestation, then our job is also to ask, what does the city fight for, And then after my research in the Amazon, I came to the conclusion that the city fights for itself. In 2016, I was a part of a research group that interrogated the reasons behind major demonstrations across large metropolis here in Brazil. And the triggers were, of course, mostly related to urban issues, apart from like federal politics, but it's mostly urban transportation and wages and housing. And there's very little mobilization following mass deforestation and rural massacres and invasion of indigenous lands and the like, which is why you have almost every year thousands of indigenous peoples and rubber tappers and peasants marching all the way down to Brasilia or some kind of major city to make themselves heard. So I think this is one of the feature that I would like to show as a massive underside. The people that are often making your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and need to march in search of that kind of mediation. The second one regards the production of knowledge. We often also think of the city as this kind of innovative machine, but you don't really consider that some of these innovative packages that are being exported might not be actually appropriate to the context where they will be used. So there's this Brazilian economist named Arley Silva, who has shown that there is an immense innovative potential of non-central areas in the Amazon that can promote distribution and endogenous development with sustainability, but they are instead rendered invisible. So one of the main reasons that most of the professionals across different disciplinary fields that could relate to these everyday problems, they are mostly living and studying and working in large urban agglomerations. So you have a bunch of technicians and designers and architects trying to create rural solutions with their urban minds that often translate into somehow inadequate technical packages. But of course, they are sometimes bought as the only package available in the market. And then everything else locally constructed is precarious, is MacGyvering, is like a quick and temporary fix that is not worth noticing or improving on investing on. And then this kind of invisibility in this off-worlds, as Wangui was saying, leave doors open for like capitalist intervention to enjoy that kind of invisibility. And then, and I'll conclude here, the third question has to do with a recently published piece on Niger around inhabitation and urban housing. I published that piece trying to argue that housing and urban studies in Brazil have been so focused on its industrial metropolises that we are missing very important forms of inhabitation that are not based in the mainstream histories of rural to urban migration in South America and industrialization and so on. So then when you actually examine these different forms of housing in a mining town in Eastern Amazonia, you can clearly see the role of extraction and of extensions in shaping those forms of inhabitation. So in contrast to the typical favelas and the cortiços and the forms, traditionally conveyed as irregularly auto-constructed, I actually took a look at the proliferation of subdivisions and private neighborhoods for like mining engineers and landless workers, encampments, and the links of these kinds of housing patterns to the rhythms and operations of extractivism. So in a way, the parallel to the main question would be, we all know where they are. We would not be able to survive without them. But then you have the elite narrations of metropolitan experience within housing research and urban studies that prevent them from actually being visible. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Rodrigo.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I really like that you concluded by saying we all know where they are and questioning whether we can actually survive without these undersides. We are at, we have organized this session so that there's one half where we answer one question, then we have a Q&A break in the middle, then we answer the second question. So we'd just like to turn it over to see if there are any questions at the moment. In my classes, I try and make students take an oath to not being shy, or I give them $5. So I don't know if anyone needs $5 to say anything. Anyone?
Yeah, there are a couple of hands, I think. Wangui, there is Sam and Kenny, maybe?
Thanks, Michele. Sorry, I couldn't see them.
No worries.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry if you hear some background noise. My name is just mowing his lawn. Now, and I think also lovely to meet Wangui. I think we met some years back at the Utadu meeting in Nairobi. Now, I mean, I was interested in Alanna's presentation, and I wanted to ask one. I mean, if the use of I'm also working on urban studies, and one of the things I've always found it difficult is how we contextualize space and place. And so I heard you talking about space itself, and I mean space as being embodied. And for me, I think that's a notion I'm always inclined to working with. And I wanted to here maybe ask if that's intentional, using space as opposed to place. Yeah, thank you.
Shall we maybe take also Kenny? What do you think?
Good
Is it
idea.
okay? Okay, thank you very much. Kenny, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you so much. My question is a bit maybe of a provocation already, if that's okay. I think you've offered really powerful inputs of how to theorize these urban undersides. And I'm wondering about the risk of kind of fixing these in both time and space and subjectivity. And I'm thinking about the kind of long history of, research on the place of the poor. You could say that really is foundational to urban sociology for over a century, which, was already referred to by Irene as kind of the dangerous classes, etc. Right? So you could say that kind of, genealogy of these areas is really accompanying also the disciplinary formation of urban sociology. And urban studies also as a more practical field, I would say. Currently I'm in Nairobi, and I was thinking about the undersides where they would be here. And of course, Kibra and other places come to mind, and these over-researched communities, where we kind of both place and categorize urban subjects and urban spaces, but also sometimes romanticize them as places of entrepreneurship or places of resistance, right? And kind of forget about some of these might also be subjects who aspire to normal middle class imaginations of dwelling, right? So I wonder how you avoid these kind of risks in research on the urban undersides. And following from that, but maybe that's too much for now, we can talk about that later, is questions of methods and ethics, because I think they do follow from how you theorize, and of course in combination. But yeah, no need to address all of this at the moment.
Anyone can, I think there's a specific question for Alanna, but either Alanna, Rodrigo or Irene can also respond to Kenny's question. So perhaps we take the specific question to Alanna and then leave space for others to weigh in on Kenny's questions. So over to Alanna.
Okay. Thank you so much for the question. I think it was Sam. I can't see the name pop up anymore. But I think it was Sam, right? I think the question was whether my use of space and place is intentional, and how that relates to the embodied. I think it's semi-intentional. I think I use the word space to gesture to embodied space or to embodied practices as constitutive of made by and making the urban, right? And I think what I liked in the term of the Undersides was that it brought me straight away to this very sort of corporeal image and set of metaphors, and to thinking about the Undersides also as inviting different ways of knowing. And I think this is where maybe it connects to Kenny's question and the question of fixing knowledge. I think also this is a way of suggesting that there might be other sort of more floating ways and channels through which we can know the urban Undersides as embodied practices, as corporeal practices, as atmospheric attunements. So yeah, I think that might be a way of responding to Sam. I hope I answered your question and bridging on to Kenny's question. Irene and Rodrigo, if you want to jump in.
Rodrigo, do you want to go? I mean, I can say a couple of things very quickly. Obviously, like Kenny's questions are very central to my own practice and thinking, and the contexts I'm dealing with are really overexposed, both in terms of sort of media representation, but also of academic research. And well, first of all, I think, well, my kind of way in was not as an individual academic, but it was like as participating in projects of collective solidarity. And this is how I then kind of made relations and learned what I did from people living in encampments. And then I think then my sort of way to try and avoid the ethical pitfalls as much as possible was to also kind of use my own position and expertise to perhaps well, help untangle some of the ways in which processes of extraction containment work, to then kind of be able to better challenge them. And so this kind of genealogical, archaeological work that I was trying to refer to kind of, you know, in terms of kind of digging up undersides, or looking at undersides from, I mean, not the underside for me is not necessarily or only the marginal, but also that which gets sort of eclipsed from view in general. And what gets eclipsed from view is kind of the ways in which certain processes of containment and segregation have been central to capitalist accumulation in agribusiness since the very beginning, and how kind of racialization has worked within them again since the very beginning. And then this is I think a small kind of contribution that I can make to think about tools to challenge these processes.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, the question of, I read a bunch of articles to like get the right answer to, you know, what happens when you are between romanticizing the poor, and then on the other hand, you cannot make the big extractivist company against the poor peasant, you know, and all these kind of ethical dilemmas. But I don't know, I think you're never gonna write the story as it is. Nobody's gonna tell it like it's really happening. You know, I think this is a kind of academic aspiration that's never going to be fulfilled. So I really think you're never going to narrate it like it is. It's not going to happen. You might try to come to terms, but you're not going to do it as it is. And I also believe that the subaltern cannot speak, you know, because it's your writing. So in the end, that being said, all my efforts at, you know, trying to produce non-extractive research, especially in the Amazon, were kind of successful, because in my case it was to work, for example, with these kinds of encampments, it was a matter of like negotiating what can you benefit from my work. And basically, when you work in places that are not over-researched, you know, because it's not that easy, it's far away, it's, you know, it's kind of complicated, then you're going to find out that people can actually use your PhD dissertation to go to court against a mining company because we're producing a document that for them is valid. So, you know, can I produce a document for people to use in court? I can, you know. I think it's about, you know, finding whatever people need and trying to honor those kinds of demands. I'm just saying all of that to say that I went from, you know, the complexity of the philosophical debates to just trying to make it simple as I can on the ground with the people that I trust and trust me.
Also, maybe just to add something that to Kenny's provocation, I think sure this is about class, but also I think the proposition of the underside, or the way at least in which I took it, was to think about okay, so invisible spaces that are normalized as invisible, but also with this sort of corporeal analogy of this underside as being fleshy and vulnerable, but also vital and essential. I think vulnerability isn't only classed, right? So this can also be, there are so many other sort of spaces that are invisibilized and that are essential, that might not necessarily, or whether the crux of the issue might not necessarily be articulated around class or disempowerment along the lines of class issues. So I think maybe that could also be an invitation to try and think about what other spaces are invisibilized, and that feed into the extractivist logics that Rodrigo and Irene and myself are sort of also thinking through. So yeah, just throwing that out there.
Are there any, I think Rosemary had her hand up. I don't know if Rosemary, you'd like to ask a question?
Sure, I'll continue a bit with the provocation, but just a small one actually. And I'll thank you so much for these reflections, which have been very, very useful. As an historian, actually, I'm used to understanding this narrative of corporality in the city, which has a long history, right, and has been used very effectively, not only in interpreting space, but also places, right? So I think that the question about the use of those two terms is very relevant. So, you know, Paris, for example, in the markets has long been described as the guts of Paris, for example, and the margins of the city as a corporality, or even the urban health movement has used the idea of the corporality in the city and understanding that. So I'm wondering, you know, what the relevance is of it today. As an historian, I'm used to looking at that from a very rational, analytical point of view and examining it. So I'll provocatively ask, you know, what the relevance, given the history, the long history of that that terminology, whether it's relevant for us today. And I also want to add to it that is very much associated with specific places rather than spaces. So how do we make that conversion that you're asking for, Alanna, or Irene, or Rodrigo, right, in understanding this? So just from an historian's perspective, I'll add that as a quick continuation.
Thank you. Maybe we'll give one speaker before we go to our second session of the second question or second half. I think, Alanna, it's going to come to you because the first question on space and place was to you. So I hope you don't mind taking it up.
No, okay, not at all. No, I think it is absolutely. You're right in underlining that this sort of these bodily metaphors for thinking about place and thinking about space have a long history, and that I think that they're still relevant in the sense that the ways in which unpacking the ways in which we deploy these metaphors is very significant. Unpacking what they mean and how their meanings change over time, and what spaces get ascribed certain bodily parts through time and through space is important and extremely relevant to sort of pick apart. And the idea that the Undersides sparked this sort of, jogged this sort of, or brought this sort of body of work, I can't escape, puns not intended, to mind, I think is also specific, is also sort of evocative, right? It means that something in this idea of thinking about the Undersides is echoing the sort of historical process of indexing certain neighborhoods, certain spaces, certain urban locations, certain cities as a whole, as belonging to or exhibiting sort of these qualities of the fleshy, vulnerable underbelly, yet indispensable livelihood. So I think that there's something there that gets sort of reproduced, or that we keep coming back to, and it's interesting to unpack why we do. And in that sense, I would say it's still relevant, that sometimes we think we're mobilizing a term that might offer something new, but it also echoes ways in which we've been thinking historically, and not necessarily in similar lines, along similar lines.
Thank you, Alanna. I hope, Rosemary, that responds to you sufficiently, but we still have some time for more discussion. Now I will ask the second question that the speakers were asked to respond to. It's very long in academic fashion, but hopefully it's simple. So the second question is, what do we as scholars need to remember or forget when it comes to chronicling the urban undersides? And what methods, again, this kind of touches on Kenny's question, what methods do we need to use to contribute to liberatory praxis for them? Because we've talked about, and I have lots of keywords here, the underside is vital, is contained, is multi-temporal, is leading to epistemic shifts. But how do we, beyond recognizing them, how can we contribute, however we can, to ensuring their self-determination or their visibility, or in, what can we do for these urban undersides? Thank you. Maybe we start, if we can, with Rodrigo, and then Irene, and then come to Alanna.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I was really happy with that question. If you don't mind, I'm just gonna make a little prelude, because this is important to me, actually. 10 years ago, when I was starting my master's, I had this incredible professor that I really loved. He was also named Rodrigo, and he was really important in my transition to urban regional studies. And he used to say something that I appreciate more and more. And he used to say, we all come to this world of academia to say one thing, you know? I mean, we're gonna have to come up with new ideas and concepts and agendas, but we really have one thing to say. And then he would ask, what is the one thing that you have to say? And I thought about that for a long time. And I think now I actually have the right context and opportunity to say that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do it here. And then I'll retire, apparently. So the thing is, what we cannot forget, in my opinion, we must never forget that the forests of the Amazon were socially produced. I mean, we must never forget that the region that captures most of the world's imaginary on biodiversity and abundant waters and mystic nature was actually managed and constructed by human hands. And of course, they are a social construct in the same way that, a wall or a garden are a social construct. They are like a combination of biophysical processes and human actions, but we can't lose sight of the fact that they were generated by management practices developed and accumulated over thousands and thousands of years by Amerindian populations. But of course, for many reasons, in many years, archaeologists said that the forest was a natural construct and that populations didn't have enough protein to grow, and that their material culture was precarious and without relevant forms of social organization. And the only reason I'm showing you Betty Maggers and Clifford Evers in these pictures is so that you can see their white faces. But then now we know that this story is actually very different from what they once said, because more recent archaeological research highlights questions of agency and scale that includes this extensive indigenous biocultural legacy from spatial practices that are associated with the production of what they now call anthropogenic landscapes. And that includes, fertile soils and several features. Archaeologists are only now beginning to understand the uniqueness of these kinds of societies and the large-scale transformations in their living space, some of which I just wrote down here in the slide, and they're massive if you think that these occupations began 11,000 years ago. And then, of course, the production of these kinds of green spaces, which are environments that we can confuse with our westernized idea of nature. These spaces were combined with spaces of inhabitation. And then you have the surrounds, and these surrounds conformed gradients with productive farms, medicinal plants and palm trees and vines and fruits connected by pathways that were equally cultivated, but not linearly like we have today because of all the trucks and all the machines. And you even have systems of regional roads that connected centralities that had a pattern of diffusion according to the resources that were available. And for me, this is really, really amazing. And my point here is all of that was possible because of a profound knowledge of plants and what they can do to residents and what they can do to each other. So what I'm actually trying to say is that today we don't know the name of the tree in front of our apartment. This is what I'm really trying to say. We don't. I mean, most people have zero relationship with plants, and that is so basic for me. When I first read the idea of the undersides and the naturally invisible eyes, I was thinking about plants all the time. And I'm not here saying that everyone needs some kind of deep knowledge of thousands of species and study agroforests, and do things like that. But you should know that if your own repertoire includes like 10 to 15 plants that might be easily available to you, you might free yourself from half of the pills that you're taking today, because these pills are probably being made from those exact plants. So this is a high level of abstraction from something that is very, very everyday and very grounded. And I do believe that most of the issues that we face today can be at least properly dealt with through forest management, like climate change and energy transitions and logistics, construction, public health, and on and on and on and on. But of course, we spend like 500 years killing all those people that actually knew how to work with those plants and how to manage the forests. And of course, some of their greatest finds are today held by Harvard University and Oxford University and all our fellow intellectuals that have registered the patent of several species and their products. So to give a straight answer to the question, and my apologies if this somehow seems too simplistic, how can we move forward in the absence of archives and formal colonial repositories? We have soil, we have seed banks, we have genetic matrices. And I think that is very central in this kind of groundedness and in this, moment of high abstraction that we're living in. What methods do we need to use to contribute to liberatory praxis for them? I'll just put a bunch of seeds on the ground and wait. I really think this is a very powerful method to have some kind of connection, So when you're having dinner later tonight, or maybe you're having a cigarette in the street tomorrow morning, try to remember that the forests of the Amazon were socially produced. And then also remember that urbanity is not a matter of concrete and metallic structures. Urbanity can also look like this, amongst other reasons, because it once actually looked like this.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Irene?
Yes, okay. Thank you, Rodrigo. That was really powerful. I'm not sure I can match up to that, but and also I hope I won't repeat myself too much. Though I think Kenny's question anticipated a lot of the things I wanted to touch upon. I mean, I think in terms of kind of what we should always remember, well, maybe not everyone here agrees with me entirely, but I mean, our jobs are kind of founded on kind of extractive logics, and even kind of, those of us with the best intentions have to grapple with the kind of politics of academic extractivism. And so in a way, I think that whatever kind of contribution we can make possibly happens kind of in the cracks of kind of academic practice, not kind of, I don't think that my greatest contributions are expressed in kind of journal articles or books, but rather in kind of the engagements I am able to enter into and maintain in the field, so to speak, and kind of in also establishing long-term relations and kind of working through slow processes, which again is not necessarily what we're encouraged to do by our profession, and this is obviously kind of a dilemma for many of us, and especially those of us who have precarious jobs. But and of course there are kind of multiple sort of negotiations to be had all the time with several kind of undersides, and here I'm thinking not only of slum dwellers, let's say, so the kind of prototypical kind of and even romanticized undersides, but also in my case, for example, with activists who, for good reasons, most of the time are very skeptical of academic research, and therefore to kind of manage to, I think, kind of put one's skills to the service of a collective emancipatory project requires kind of some healthy distance from academic discourse. Yes, I mean, I don't know if I can say much more than that. I think that really, I mean, obviously kind of intellectual tools are very important in precisely identifying kind of processes of extraction and segregation and marginalization to better be able to confront them. And so I'm not arguing against kind of intellectual practice per se, but I think that the way in which then kind of we engage with it in terms of both the kind of tempo of research, the methods of research. I mean, again, kind of for me, engaging with this field also meant kind of foregoing completely things like interviews, for example, or notes taking or any of this sort of thing, in favor of, again, kind of learning through practices of solidarity. And I really can't think of any other way to do this. And then kind of by this identifying kind of the sort of, let's call them the gaps in the knowledge we have of processes of extraction and seeking to kind of fill the gaps and engage. I mean, I think in terms of the challenges, I think it's been very hard to really establish collective forms of research and knowledge creation. I mean, that is also, I guess, kind of the result of our very different positionalities, our kind of, the very different lives we are entitled to have, and the priorities we are forced to face in our lives. And I'm talking about kind of collective solidarity work again. And so this for me continues to be a challenge, because I think that militant or activist research is a really kind of good idea, but then kind of how to put that in practice is very hard to imagine and do, and because of the very kind of material limitations of time and resources that we're faced with.
Thank you, Irene. Alanna?
So maybe this echoes what Irene, you were saying just now. I think in the way the question was asked, I took a little bit of issue. I took issue with the framing of the question, the idea that the first half of the sentence of the question has a we, and the liberatory practices are for them. And the issue for me is that the we and the them is blurred, or I would like us to conceive of it as potentially blurred. And I mean that in the sense that I don't necessarily know that I really write for anyone other than a liberatory practices that encompasses my own. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, I would like to contribute to liberatory practice for us more than for them, and that I and the we and the them then becomes blurred. I'm not being very clear with with all of this, but I think you see what I mean, is that there was something in that sort of separation that I already felt was maybe part of the issue, and that maybe rethinking the structure of that sentence might already be part of contributing to liberatory praxis. And so the second thing that I wanted to say was, if I circle back to the places that I think with, or from which I think, one of the first things I try to remember when writing about them or producing some kind of academic, I don't know, knowledge, for want of a better word, is to resist or push back the tendency that I have to flatten things and to see social processes as mapped onto a space in a kind of layered way. And of course, this sort of flattening is something that is informed by our academic training, something we do as a sort of a shorthand. And it's also something that is useful to think through how power operates, to think about how power operates, right? As maybe something that trickles down or that gets pushed back up. So it is useful, but I do try to push back against it insofar as a lot of the practices of individuals or communities that I've worked with or thought along or even feel a part of sort of disrupt these layers, sort of completely undo these layers in so many different ways. To give a more concrete example, if I think about Kingston and I think about Trenchtown, there's a very telling example that comes to mind and is linked to the sort of clientelistic structure of the city and of neighborhoods such as Trenchtown. Whereby individuals, or I'm thinking in particular of a person that I was in conversation with, and this is a person with whom we were working in the neighborhood in a youth outreach program, and who was facing severe sort of financial crises that was also sort of impacting his ability to continue creating this youth outreach program. And I remember the moment where he pulled out his phone and was just like, you know what, let me just try and sort this out, and proceeded to call the Prime Minister's aide. And all of a sudden, there was this sort of circuiting of the layers that just happened, whereby there's sort of these neatly sort of lasagna logics that I had of, you know, how power operates, what the different strata are, how they are classed, how they are indexed and spatialized, were completely disrupted by just a phone call that sort of redistributed agency and power. And of course, this was linked to a very specific history history of how clientelism plays out in the Caribbean, in Jamaica more specifically, the sort of history of unionism, organization, and urban fractures and organization. But there was something in that kind of reminded me that these lasagnas are never neat, and that we need to push back against neatly bounding the objects of our inquiry. And this is also confirmed by my current project on rocks in outer space and museums, where I've been inspired also by the work of Laura Harjo, who's an indigenous scholar who talks about the potentiality of jumping scales, of thinking and writing in ways that kind of jump from body to community, from community to outer space, from the undergrounds of the Earth's bedrock to the top of buildings, and to kind of, in these non-linear scalar sort of relations, trace emergent geographies. And so what Laura Harjo is really proposing is this sort of spirally shaped and more unbounded way of chronicling processes. And I think this speaks back to Irene when you were talking about invoking these temporalities and these sort of archives. And also Rodrigo, when you're talking about also looking at these spaces beyond as the urban as part of the urban also. I think it speaks to these sort of spatial and temporal spirals that we can also jump across and through. And I think that contributes to maybe seeing processes as emergent, and also maybe liberatory praxis as emergent, and being able to chronicle them or to pay attention to them and to amplify them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Michele.
Thank you, Wangui. Thank you, Alanna, Rodrigo, Irene. So we have some time for some questions. Anyone would like to ask questions to our guests? Alanna?
I had a question for Irene, if I can. I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
allowed.
of course. Yeah.
You were talking about learning through practices of solidarity and sort of foregoing sort of more sedimented methodologies such as interviews and that sort of traditional forms of data gathering. And I was wondering what you meant, or if you could unpack a little bit this notion of practices of solidarity as a form. Did I understand correctly that this is a form of data collection, or something that you view as a form of data collection, or not at all? And yeah, that's what my question is.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would, thank you for the question. I'm not sure I would call it data, but definitely it's like the way I learned, and I still do, the way I've been learning what I know about the places I'm talking about. And this began at a very particular historical juncture when kind of a couple of moments of overt resistance on the part of migrant farm workers intersected with Italian kind of collective activist groups, and this is where kind of this project of kind of seeking to sort of support and amplify, as you were saying, I think that's the verb you use, these moments of resistance. This is when the idea arose. This is in 2011, 2012. And therefore, kind of with a bunch of people, we started to, first of all, simply kind of establish a presence in places of well, more or less informal encampments, where you already had kind of interventions of various sorts, from kind of language training to, I mean, legal orientation, you know, these kinds of things. This is how kind of I got to first learn about these spaces. And then, you know, through kind of very slowly, I mean, it took years to really understand kind of how we could position ourselves in kind of effective ways within these contexts. And then kind of we, well, incrementally in some sense, but not, I mean, incrementally in the long term, but also with moments of kind of up and moments of downs. We had the chance to well, organize together with people living in encampments to kind of demand, well, legal recognition, for example, or to resist eviction, or, you know, these were the basic sort of moments of overt kind of protest. But then kind of this entailed kind of much more kind of long-term everyday engagements and kind of building of relations and seeking ways to kind of build bridges and kind of act as translators between kind of, say, bureaucracies and people who had to deal with them. I mean, kind of to trying to learn ways to sort of manipulate the law or use the law to kind of, for people to get recognition, both individually and collectively. This is how kind of, you know, we've been operating as a group, as a collective. And this is how I got to kind of learn more and more about I mean, not only the encampments themselves, but like what's then kind of made them possible and what sustains them. You know, both in terms of kind of structures of power and extraction, and in terms of then kind of resistances against them, because as I said, these are not kind of straightforwardly spaces of extraction or resistance. Again, going back to Kenny's question, I mean, we don't want to romanticize these undersides, but we don't want to victimize them, you know, fully. I mean, there's always kind of contradictions, like everywhere, I guess. So I don't know if this answers your question, but this is kind of the sort of groundwork on which I then kind of built lines of more kind of in-depth research into the ways in which kind of, for example, supply chains work, into the ways in which then kind of histories and stratifications of projects of segregation have been kind of sedimenting in agro-industrial enclaves. I mean, I've looked at different aspects in my kind of more formal academic work on the basis of something that was not so formal, as it were.
All right, thank you, Irene. Do we have any follow-up? Any further question before we close things up?
I think there are two.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see the hands. Sorry, the screen was too small on my laptop. Andra, and then we have Roseanne. So Andra, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to figure out how to, there, okay, lower my hand. First of all, thank you all so much. Thank you to the organizers, the moderators, and the three of you for your really interesting and insightful comments. I had a very simple question, and it's just kind of, you know, as all of us kind of motivated by my own kind of position and, you know, the work that I'm doing. But I'm thinking about, I teach Latin American and world history at Washington State University, which was a public land grant university. And it's a very interesting, there's a lot of rural focus because it's a land grant university, but I'm also in the suburbs, I'm on a suburban campus. But I was curious about how you think about teaching and the classroom as a liberatory space. I mean, you've had some really very insightful, very provocative things to think about engagement with communities that we're researching. But, you know, on a day-to-day basis, I think that's a really important space. And I was thinking about that with your comment, Rodrigo, when you were speaking about the stereotypes that students have about the Amazon, because I teach about Latin American history, and then, you know, students come in with all these kind of just, you know, they don't know very much about so many things that we're teaching. And so I wanted to just invite some comments about working with students in the classroom and thinking about through these kind of all the themes that you've been discussing.
That's a wonderful question. Thank you, Andra. Teaching is such an underside, to use Wangui's word. Most of the times it shouldn't be, really. Thank you for that, Roseanne, and then we move to our guest.
Thank you. My question, I think, follows really nicely from your question, Andra. And it's basically about how does working across generations enter into your work? And yeah, have you noticed changing demographics, changing age groups, connection with the space change? And I think that also relates quite a bit, maybe perhaps more in an informal way, intergenerational skill sharing. And Rodrigo, I was inspired by what you were saying about the seeds, because where I live in Glasgow, there's a seed bank, and they do classes with older farmers, teaching younger people about the seeds. And I think, yeah, it's just one example in which I think it's really beautiful intergenerational skill sharing happening. So perhaps mine is more of an informal caveat to your question. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been really great.
Thank you, Roseanne. And I'm just going to pass it on to anyone who would like to pick this up. And I just say goodbye to everybody. I'm sorry, I have family duties. I need to leave now, but Wangui will close this event. And Wangui, thank you so much for having us. It was beautiful. Goodbye.
You, and just to say for the speakers, maybe this is the moment to also give your profound closing remarks, which we know you have. So when you respond to Andra and Ozan, please also incorporate it with your closing remarks. And thank you, Michele, too, for all of your hard work. Thanks. Maybe we can start with Irene, who has always been going in the middle. Do you want to respond to questions and also give your final remarks?
Wow, okay. Yes, there's a very short answer to the question on teaching, which is that unfortunately I didn't get to do much teaching because I work at the research institute. So, but I mean, I do agree that, of course, I mean, more than writing, perhaps teaching has potential for kind of unsettling certain kind of ways of looking at the world. So of course it is important. I mean, after all, I came to be what I am in large part, or in no small parts, through university teaching as well. But then, yeah, I mean, of course, I think the same caveats apply in relation to kind of, you know, the politics, the university politics too. So I think, you know, that there's also problems there. I mean, I'm not an expert again because I'm not doing much teaching at all. But yes, in terms of transgenerational dialogue and differences, there's a number of kind of contexts that your question might apply to in my case. And so, for example, if then you have kind of till today, kind of some of the people who live in some of the migrant people who live in such spaces are actually kind of the original founders of them. And we're talking about people who first set foot in Europe in the 1990s, probably now, and who then kind of in many cases sort of carved a space of survival for themselves in those places, and also carved positions of authority within those spaces. And so again, kind of the question of autonomy comes in relation to that of power. So of course there's kind of power dynamics going on also in terms of intergenerational politics. So even when we're looking at kind of autonomous spaces of reproduction, we're also looking at kind of relations that are inflected by power and different dimensions of power, age being one, or seniority more than age, I would say, but also gender and sexual orientation. Although interestingly, I think the encampments I'm dealing with are places where even queer people find their own kind of, you know, sometimes refuge, you know. So and both migrant and Italian, in fact. And then, yeah, I mean, I don't know, in terms of my final remarks, I'm a bit averse to conclusions, but I think this is, well, hopefully kind of one more step of an ongoing conversation. And I look forward to continuing it with you all. And well, thanks again for the opportunity. It was a great sort of stimulus to thinking more. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. Alanna?
Maybe a very brief response to the questions about teaching and intergenerational sort of links. that I thought were very interesting. Thank you so much for those questions. Yeah, sometimes I like to think of teaching as activism, or as the space where I do some of my activism, as a space where at least there's some form of active unlearning, but also where these sort of, where there's some active learning on my part. So there's also, it's an exchange, it's a space of exchange, and it's in that sense also a space of intergenerational exchange. So yeah, that's a sort of brief answer. And yeah, maybe just to speak back, just to respond, to elaborate a tiny bit. I think, Andrea, you'd mentioned having students who didn't know anything about the Amazon, but then what I do find interesting also is that in teaching topics and finding that students might not know anything about them, what is always interesting and fascinating to me is the assumptions that they have. And so that there is always a form of knowledge that is already there, that the painting is already colored in. And so it's interesting to kind of do the work to unpack what that sort of, what those sets of assumptions are and why they're there. And that is often this sort of point of departure for the unlearning. And yeah, what was it that you said, Wangui, that we needed to offer? Was it profound closing remarks that you'd invited? I don't think I can live up to that invitation. Instead, I just want to say thank you. I think I'm going to walk away with a lot of interesting thoughts. I really want to say thank you for the provocations. I'm already sort of, yeah, walking away with an unsettled sort of sense of whether or not the undersides, how the undersides works conceptually for me. It was unsettled before, it still is, but in different ways. And I want to say thank you for sort of generating that. And also thank you to Irene and Rodrigo, because you're always so interesting to listen to. And I'm also going to walk away with lots of thoughts.
Thank you too, Alanna. Rodrigo.
Okay. I hope that what I'm about to say answers or maybe relates to the questions. I'm a man raised in a big industrial metropolis from Brazil with 5 million people, and I did my field work in the Amazon. And that's terrifying because we think we know stuff, but then what you really have to be prepared for is to, attest your own ignorance day by day. And it's going to be very hard and very astonishing. And for me, the classroom has a lot to do with that. I've never been more terrified than when I had to teach a course in Marabá, which is the closest university to the region that I was doing my research. And they didn't want to know about me saying stuff about the Amazon. You know what I mean? They were like, man, you're from the Southeast. What the hell are you doing here? Talking about this. But then, which relates to the things that you were saying, Andrea, about, students don't know much about the Amazon. They were interested in my trips to Singapore because I had lived in Singapore for like close to 1 year, and tropical forest environment, and then you can kind of show what in the kind of same biome, what kinds of things exist out there, and then that brings the question back to the Amazon and then to their environments. So I don't know, I think you just have to find the tools, and then you have to have the humility to sometimes just take it. Because I have a great story in the late 60s, I think, or in the 70s. They were trying to make this regional plan around Belém, which is in Eastern Amazonia. And they brought the one and only John Friedman to do it. And then he was there with his assistants, and they were presenting all those complicated models and all those equations and the maps and everything. And and then in the back of the class, a student raised the hand and they go, "Can I ask something? Is this up the river or down the river?" and they just didn't have an answer because the model didn't take that into consideration. So sometimes I think you just have to have the humility to just take it and understand, what's really going on in the room. You're not the master, just You're just someone trying to facilitate some kind of collective learning. This is how I think. And maybe my ending remarks come back to the question of positionality. I have never learned more than when I decided to place my body in a completely new environment to me and ask the same questions that I used to ask when I was in downtown Belo Horizonte in a big metropolis, you know? So I think there's great value in doing that. I think this is how you come to understand, you know, what we are here referred to as undersides. And I also believe that we should never forget that the global history of the urban is also the global history of the hinterlands. But maybe no one else in the hinterlands are actually telling those stories. So maybe we should pay more attention, you know, to what's going on out there. Thank you.
Thank you all. I just want to say thanks so much for coming here with barely any instructions, with a kind of vague term, but really bringing yourselves to the table. You really did show up. Just because I have the job to close, I just want to say a few terms that came from this discussion that really stuck out for me. So undersides are vital, contained, unsettled, multi-temporal, the heart and the gut, unlearning, epistemic shifts, perhaps a geography or a time. They're inside, they're outside, they're rural, a different way to know, they're fleshy, they're vulnerable, they're the surrounds, they forgo interviews for solidarity practices, they're not lasagna logics, and they make us question, what does a city fight for? But above all, the urban undersides are us, not them, as Alanna really emphasized, whether they're in Gaza, Sudan, Khartoum, the Amazonia, Italy. The urban undersides are us. So that's what some terms that I got from this. Thank you again, just to highlight that the Narrating Urban Lives series has 2 more events on May 22nd, we have one with Kenny called World Making. And June 5th, we have one called Critical Temporalities. And that's it. Thank you so much for showing up and co-learning. Thank you so much. And thank you to Carl and to Maytal, who did a lot of the tech work that we take for granted. Thank you, everyone. Take care.